Sometimes God works through unsuspecting people. Let me tell you a story today that starts with a woman named Naomi and her husband. Naomi and her husband were Israelites. They were children of God, and they lived in the promised land. And when they lived, God's people had been in the promised land for many years. But it was a bad time in the promised land. There had been no rain, which meant the crops did not grow. And that meant that the people had nothing to eat. So Naomi's husband and Naomi traveled out of the promised land to a foreign country. They traveled to a place called Moab, and there they made their home, because in Moab they had food, and they were able to start a family. And they had one son, they had two sons, and their sons grew up, and they married women from the land of Moab. I'm sure this made Naomi a little bit sad, because it had always been important to the Israelites that their children marry other Israelites, marry people who worshiped only Yahweh, the one true God. But here they were living in a foreign land, and thankfully in that foreign land they were greeted with hospitality, and they were welcomed, and they were cared for. But things didn't always go well. Naomi's husband died, and so did both of her sons. And Naomi was left with her two daughter-in-laws, Ruth and Orpah. Now, Naomi had no way of caring for her daughter-in-laws. She had no way of taking care of herself. And so she told her daughter-in-laws, I can't really take care of you. I'm going back to my homeland, to my family, to see if they will help me. But I can't promise you anything. So Orpah left. She went back to her own family. She found another husband who would provide for her. But Ruth refused to leave Naomi. Listen to the pledge of faith that she makes in Ruth chapter 1, starting in verse 16. Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. I wonder what inspired Ruth to make such a commitment. What inspired Ruth to have such faith? I wonder what she saw in Naomi's faith. I wonder what people see in your faith, in my faith. Do they see a God that they would trust their lives to? Naomi led Ruth back to the promised land, back to Israel. And when they got there, they didn't know what was going to happen. But God was with them. And God prepared a way for them. Ruth met a man named Boaz. And as she was working in his fields and collecting some of the food that had fallen to the ground to provide for herself and her mother-in-law. And Boaz had compassion on Ruth and Naomi. And Boaz took Ruth to be his wife. And this young woman, Ruth, not born one of God's people, but yet she became a very important person in the history of God's people, because she would have a grandson that many would know. His name would be David. I guess it doesn't always matter where we come from, does it? I wonder how our faith will impact the people that we meet. I wonder how your faith will impact generations to come, even generations you will never meet. May God work through us today, this week, and for generations to come.